There was a lot going on in America in the summer of 1974. The Arab oil embargo came to an end in March, but oil and gasoline prices remained high. The embargo's effects on the world economy were beginning to be felt, but how bad it would get remained to be seen. The World's Fair, dubbed Expo 74, had opened in Spokane, Washington on May 4th. It would continue through November, attracting 5.6 million visitors. On June 4th, Cleveland Indians owner Bill Veeck decided to stage a 10-cent beer night at Cleveland Stadium as the Indians faced off against the Texas Rangers. 6 days earlier, during their previous series in Arlington, the two teams had engaged in a wild bench-clearing brawl, so the Cleveland crowd arrived primed for whatever might happen. The result was a drunken riot as fans rushed the field in the ninth inning, forcing players to defend themselves with bats as they retreated to the clubhouse. The Watergate scandal had slowly simmered through 1973, but the revelation of the White House recording system and the tapes it produced caused the scandal to reach a rapid boil. On July 24th, the Supreme Court ruled 8-0 that the president must turn over the subpoenaed tapes to Special Prosecutor Leon Jaworski. Richard Nixon would be forced to resign in disgrace 16 days later. Provincetown, Massachusetts is a mostly quiet little town at the barb of the hooked peninsula that forms Cape Cod. The town is dominated by the towering granite Pilgrim Monument commemorating the signing of the Mayflower Compact at the location of the Pilgrims' first landfall in the New World. For most of the year, it's a quiet little place that comes to life when spring turns to summer, bringing the hordes of tourists from New York and other crowded cities to enjoy the fishing, swimming, and quiet evenings in the numerous dune shacks that dot the beaches lining the bay. In contrast to the national events, the only remotely unusual thing going on near Cape Cod that July was that a bunch of Hollywood types were making a movie down in Edgartown on Martha's Vineyard, but that was over 100 miles away. Little did anyone know that the movie was Jaws. It would become one of the most successful films made up to that time, create the summer blockbuster, and introduce a young director named Steven Spielberg to a broad audience. Such was Provincetown at approximately 6 p.m. on July 26, 1974. The weather was pleasant that evening, and the Metcalf family went out to Race Point to visit with friends who were staying in one of the dune shacks on the point. Lenny Metcalf, his wife Sally, and their 12-year-old daughter Leslie, accompanied by one of their friend's dogs, headed through the woods toward the beach for some fishing. They didn't catch any fish, but they did have a short snack of cheese and wine for the adults before starting their return to the shack. They were only a short distance down the trail when the dog alerted and took off into the woods, followed by young Leslie. It wasn't long before Leslie spotted what had set the dog off. It was lying a short distance off the service road, and from the odor, she could tell it was dead and had been for several days. The young girl's immediate thought was that it was a deer, but as her parents arrived, she came to realize it was not an animal. It was a human body. This is Crime Noir, Episode 5, The Lady of the Dunes. If you find this interesting, don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and if you know of a crime you'd like us to take a dive into, leave us a comment. It all helps us reach more people and grow the channel. So with that, let's get into a bigger boat and head out to sea. The park rangers were summoned, and after viewing the scene, they alerted the Provincetown police. The body was that of a female lying face down on a beach blanket, but she was lying on one side of the blanket as if she were sharing it with someone. She was nude, but the clothes, a pair of Wrangler blue jeans and a blue bandana, were neatly folded and placed under her head as if they were a pillow. The hands were missing, as was part of one forearm. The left side of her skull was severely crushed, and from the shape of the wound, investigators speculated that the murder weapon may have been a military-style entrenching tool. In the early 1970s, these were readily available from various sources, including Army surplus stores, sporting goods retailers, and discount stores. It also appears that there had been an attempt to decapitate the body. The body's toenails were painted pink, and her reddish brown hair was tied back in a ponytail held in place by a gold speckled elastic hair tie. She carried no identification. The only other forensic evidence found at the scene was two footprints leading up to the body and some tire tracks about 50 feet away. The autopsy revealed that she was between 20 and 40 years old, 5 foot 6 inches, 145 pounds, with an athletic build. She had expensive crowns on several of her teeth, but some of her teeth had been removed post mortem. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition, leading the coroner to the conclusion that it had been deceased for 10 days or more. An examination of the area around the body indicated that the victim was not killed where she was found. The killer did the deed elsewhere, brought her to this spot, and posed the body. This type of case is one of the most difficult that an investigator can encounter. There is an unidentified and unidentifiable body found. The time and date of death are only estimated within a sizable window, and the victim was found in a semi-isolated area where most of the people were transient tourists who only stayed for a few days at a time. The incessant drudgery of police work began with detectives knocking on doors, making phone calls, and sending out bulletins to neighboring jurisdictions. They ran down every lead and kept meticulous notes of their activities until they came to dead end after dead end. Not stopping, they expanded their search, sending out information to law enforcement around the US and even Canada, but turned up nothing. I would say that the trail went cold, but there was no trail to follow. There was nothing, and it appeared that the case would never be solved. Jane Doe, popularly dubbed the Lady of the Dunes, was buried in St. Peter's Cemetery in Provincetown under a headstone inscribed, "Unidentified female body found Race Point Dunes, July 26, 1974." The case was cold, but that didn't mean the Massachusetts State Police and the Provincetown detectives stopped working on it. They still pursued the occasional leads that came in, and in 1979 they hired a forensic artist to attempt to reconstruct the victim's face using the exhumed skull as a guide. They sent out photos of the reconstruction to every law enforcement agency in the country, but got no responses. Hoping to find something they missed in the initial investigation, police had the body exhumed in 1980 for further examination, but they turned up nothing new. Over the ensuing years, many tips were received and followed up on, but none provided a resolution. What follows is a sampling. I'm going to start with these first two tips because they were widely disseminated over the internet decades after the body was found, but neither of them was ever a viable suspect. The first is Boston criminal kingpin Whitey Bulger. I have read several online accounts and listened to a couple of podcasts where Bulger was listed as a potential suspect. One podcaster referred to him as Whitney Bulger, which I think demonstrates a lack of commitment to researching the subject matter. If any evidence exists at all, it is solely that Bulger often removed the teeth of his victims to prevent identification. The other potential suspect was a man named Tony Costa. That was particularly ridiculous. While Costa was a serial killer and operated around the Cape Cod area, he died in prison in May 1974, 2 months before the body of the Lady of the Dunes was discovered. In 1987, a Canadian woman contacted the Massachusetts State Police to say her father had killed somebody in 1972 in or near Cape Cod. Their investigation revealed that the man was nowhere near Provincetown, and the lead was dismissed. Later that year, investigators attempted what was to be the second of several facial reconstructions in an attempt to identify the victim. Pictures of the result were sent out to all the law enforcement agencies in US and Canada, which produced a lead when a woman reported that it looked like her sister, who went missing in 1974 and was last seen in Boston. The lead turned out to be a dead end. A more interesting possibility arrived in 1989. The story begins in January of 1973. Rory Jean Kessinger had run away from home at 15 and gotten in with a bad crowd. In January of 1973, Pembroke, Massachusetts Police Lieutenant William Bolter was assisting in serving a drug warrant. When he knocked at the door and announced himself, he saw people running out the back and scattering in all directions. The only one he was able to catch was Rory Kessinger, who tripped over a tree root. She was also clad only in lingerie. Bolter took Kessinger back to the house where he intended to wait for backup to return from chasing the other escapees, but as they entered, Kessinger flipped off the lights and bolted to another room. The lieutenant followed, and when he turned on the lights, he was confronted by Kessinger holding a gun. Bolter reacted quickly and disarmed her, forced her to the floor, and got handcuffs on her. Other officers arrived and took Kessinger to a hospital where she was able to get another officer's gun and threatened to shoot him. After being disarmed a second time, Rory Kessinger was charged with 2 counts of assault with intent to kill and locked up in the Plymouth County Jail. She remained in jail until May 26, 1973, when someone smuggled a hacksaw blade to her, which she used to cut through her cell bars. Kessinger got into the laundry room undetected and tore up sheets from which she made a makeshift rope, cut through the grating on the laundry room window, and lowered herself to the ground where accomplices were waiting in a car. Rory Jean Kessinger was never seen again. After the first forensic facial construction, a few people who saw the result thought the Lady of the Dunes might just be Rory Jean Kessinger. Investigators could find no evidence that Kessinger had ever been in Cape Cod, and a later DNA comparison with her mother was conclusive. The body was not that of Rory Jean Kessinger. Then there was Vicki Lamberton, a master's degree candidate at Assumption College. In late January 1974, Vicki had been estranged from her husband, Lowell Lamberton, when she called him to discuss getting back together. She suggested that they get together to talk about it when she returned from a weekend trip to Maine with her girlfriends. When Vicki did not call again to set up the meeting, Lowell called Vicki's friend, who informed him that there had been no plan to go to Maine. Lowell Lamberton never filed a missing persons report because he never suspected foul play. Vicki often radically changed her appearance and talked about going to a place where no one knew her and starting over as a new person. His assumption was that she had done just that. As late as 2012, Lowell stated that he thought she was likely still alive. At any rate, the Lady of the Dunes was exhumed again to collect DNA evidence, but the results proved inconclusive. In 2004, imprisoned serial killer Haddon Irving Clark sent a letter to the Massachusetts State Police claiming he killed the Lady of the Dunes, knew who she was, and had hidden evidence in his grandfather's backyard. He refused to tell authorities her identity because he thought they had mistreated him. Clark was a paranoid schizophrenic, which led the police to discount his confession. He led investigators to his grandparents' property where they found a buried plastic bucket. The bucket contained over 200 pieces of jewelry that he claimed to have collected as trophies taken from his victims. He was a good suspect, but nothing was found that could be tied to the Lady of the Dunes. In 2010, the police sent the victim's skull to a lab for a computed tomography or CT scan. That scan was used as the basis for a computer-generated forensic reconstruction. The new result was also distributed throughout the US and Canada with no result. There was a third exhumation in 2013 to attempt to collect more DNA samples. Where the other attempts had produced no leads, this time there were reasons for hope. The technology had advanced exponentially, and home DNA tests placed a lot more people in the DNA databases. The first were made available in 2000, and by 2013 they had become a major industry as people used these simple tests to help trace their genealogical roots. By 2013, the DNA databases had become quite large, and the hope was that someone related to the Lady of the Dunes was in them, but this time technicians were unable to gather usable DNA samples, and she remained unidentified. In August 2015, Joe Hill, writer and son of author Stephen King, was watching the movie Jaws when he noticed a woman in one of the scenes who was wearing blue jeans and a blue bandana covering her hair. The Lady of the Dunes was found with her head resting on a pair of neatly folded blue jeans and a blue bandana. Mr. Hill took the leap from that to the woman in the scene could have been the Lady of the Dunes. Here is the scene.
I'm telling you, we need men to patrol the swimming area. We've got to have help. Anybody with a gun or a boat.
Did you see her? She's only on the screen for less than 2 seconds. Here it is again.
I'm telling you, we need men to patrol the swimming area. We've got to have help. Anybody with a gun or a boat.
How Joe Hill spotted her and made any kind of connection to the Lady of the Dunes is a mystery to me, but he did. So, who are the people in this scene? When I rewatched the movie as an adult who had learned a little about filmmaking, I thought the shot was a pickup, meaning it was shot after principal photography was done, and the people were just whoever happened to be on the ferry when it came in. Most of the reporting about the chance that the lady in the shot is the Lady of the Dunes refers to her as an extra, and she may well have been. The people who got off the ferry were a mixture of hired extras, whom we call background now, volunteers from the island's population, and members of the film's technical crew. That's a fairly tight group, and I think if that woman were the Lady of the Dunes, someone else in that shot would have known her and would have come forward, but no one ever came forward and said, "Oh, that's my Aunt Susie." But then she's on screen for such a small amount of time, and she is at the edge of the frame where most people would be looking at the middle. Maybe no one who knew her noticed, or no one who knew her was aware of the Lady of the Dunes. Much has been made of the blue bandana, which people today find unusual, but as someone who lived through the 70s, I can say that it was a common but unattractive fashion choice in those days. Here's Lorraine Gary wearing one in the movie. The costumer on that 70s show picked up on the style choice and had Donna Pinciotti wear one from time to time. In 2018, a biotech company named Othram was founded in Woodlands, Texas. The company's mission was to utilize advanced technology to extract DNA information from crime scenes and unidentified victims in situations where the evidence was thought to be lost. The Lady of the Dunes was exhumed for a 4th time so the skeletal remains could be sent to the lab for examination. When the remains arrived in Texas, technicians were faced with a daunting problem. Previous attempts to extract usable DNA from the bones had left them contaminated with various chemicals, such as formaldehyde, which prevented unsuccessful DNA sequencing at various labs in the past. Othram scientists were able to extract DNA samples that were previously considered badly degraded. Over time, they were able to rebuild those DNA sequences through the emerging science of genome sequencing. The reconstructed DNA profile was sent to the FBI in Washington, where it was used in a genealogical search that led to a close relative. In October 2022, a confirming DNA comparison was run, and the Lady of the Dunes was identified as 37-year-old Ruth Marie Terry. Ruth Marie Terry was born in Whitwell, Tennessee on September 8, 1936. Her mother died when Ruth was young, and Ruth also married young. Her marriage soon dissolved, and looking for a new start, she left the tiny coal town of Whitwell, traveling to Livonia, Michigan, where she found a job at a Fisher Body automobile plant. While there, she became pregnant, and in the late 1950s and early 1960s, being an unwed mother was scandalous, plus at 20, Ruth Marie likely thought she was too young to be saddled with the baby. Her supervisor at Fisher Body and his wife were in their 40s and wanted to adopt. She worked out an arrangement with her boss in exchange for his paying for her expenses and the hospital bills. She would sign over her parental rights. Following the birth, Ruth Marie left her job in Fisher and began traveling around the country while occasionally returning to Whitwell for short visits. She eventually found her way to California before moving to Reno, where she met an antiques dealer named Guy Rockwell. On February 16, 1974, Ruth Marie Terry married Guy, but unbeknownst to the new bride, there was a lot more to her new husband than met the eye. First of all, Rockwell was not his legal name. His legal name was Guy Rockwell Moldavan, and including Ruth Marie, Moldavan was married at least 4 times. Now, when writing about people who use aliases, things can get confusing. To try to reduce the confusion, I'll refer to Guy Rockwell Moldavan as the name he used during the events being described, but I will note when he changes his name. I hope that works. Moldavan's father had problems with alcohol abuse and mental illness, which drove his mother to take her son and move to New Mexico. At some point, Moldavan began using the name Raoul Rockwell. He married for the first time to Jo Ellen Loop, and the young couple moved to Seattle, where Rockwell opened an antique shop. He developed a reputation as a womanizer, often entertaining women after hours in the shop, which some described as being laid out like a kitschy nightclub. Despite his philandering, Jo Ellen stayed with Rockwell for nearly a decade before divorcing him. Rockwell soon remarried to Manzanita Mearns, a divorced mother of 3. The couple moved to a 2-story house in Seattle, where Rockwell set up a new antique shop on the ground floor. Manzanita's 2 younger children remained in Canada with their father, but her oldest daughter, Dolores, accompanied her mother to Seattle and enrolled at the University of Washington. In April 1960, both Manzanita and Dolores went missing. Up to that time, Manzanita had made regular visits to her 2 children in Canada. However, when she failed to show up for a scheduled visit in late March and her ex-husband William Mearns was unable to contact her, he filed a missing person report with the Seattle police. In Rockwell's first interview with investigators, he said he did not know where his wife and stepdaughter were, and then also mentioned that he had gotten a Fulbright fellowship to go to Africa and study Ashanti gold pieces. He said he'd be leaving on September 1st. That July, Rockwell filed for divorce from Manzanita, citing desertion as grounds. When she did not appear at the hearing, the divorce was granted. 8 days later, Rockwell married his 3rd wife, Evelyn Emerson. This marriage was a short one. Telling his new in-laws that he was going to Canada to buy some antiques for resale in the U.S., Rockwell convinced them to write him a check for $10,000, which was a not insignificant amount of money in those days. Rockwell never bought any antiques and never went to Canada. He took the money and ran, first to San Francisco and later to New York, but the police did not know that yet. Realizing their new son-in-law had swindled them, Evelyn's parents filed a complaint which brought Seattle police with a search warrant to Rockwell's home. In the attic, they found bloodstains and a sawed bone on the floor. In the basement, they found fresh cement over the septic tank. After removing the cement and opening the tank, the police found human remains inside. The police were no longer looking for a simple fraudster. They were looking for a killer. Rockwell had been gone for less than a month when police from other jurisdictions began looking at his movements in years past and comparing them to unsolved murders in their areas. There were several, but one in particular stands out to me. On June 18, 1950, the body of 22-year-old Henry Baird was found near Table Bluff, California. His body was nude and he had been shot. Baird had been on a date with local waitress Barbara Jo Kelly the night before he was found, and she had also disappeared. The police assumed that the killer had kidnapped Barbara Jo and she was never found. Barbara Jo's and Henry's clothing was found neatly folded and stacked near Henry's body. Ruth Marie Terry's clothing was found neatly folded under her head. That may be a coincidence, but it is interesting. The manhunt for Rockwell came to an end in New York City on December 1st, 1960, when, acting on information provided by the FBI, NYPD officers broke through the door of Rockwell's Greenwich Village apartment and detained him under a warrant from Seattle, Washington. The charge was unlawful flight to avoid testifying before a grand jury. He was returned to Seattle on December 7th. After 10 months of legal wrangling, Rockwell went to trial on October 18, 1961, but not for murder. He was being tried for swindling his in-laws out of $10,000. Rockwell waived his right to a jury trial as his lawyers felt that an unbiased jury could not be found. They were setting the stage for dealing with the murder trial that they thought would follow. After a 7-day trial, Rockwell was found guilty of the fraud charge and sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the sentence suspended. There was no trial for the murders of Manzanita and Dolores. Police were unable to establish who the remains found in the septic tank belonged to, and the prosecutors felt that there was not enough evidence to go to trial. Rockwell walked free. After his trial, we lose track of Rockwell for a while. At some point, he reemerged using his original name, Guy Moldovan, and married to Ruth Marie Terry. While Ruth had wandered the country since leaving Livonia in 1958, she sometimes returned unexpectedly to her hometown of Whitwell. In March 1974, she came for an unexpected visit accompanied by her new husband, Guy Moldovan. The family thought that Ruth was not acting like herself, and there was something odd about Moldovan and her relationship. He seemed overly possessive, never letting Ruth out of his sight. As Ruth and Guy left Ruth's brother's house, they mentioned that they might be going to Massachusetts. That was the last time the family saw Ruth. In late August 1974, Moldovan returned to Whitwell without Ruth and informed her family that she had left their California home, but he did not know her whereabouts. Ruth's family hired an investigator who reported that all of Ruth's belongings had been sold, and she left of her own free will after joining a religious cult. Moldovan returned to California, where he worked in a jewelry store on Rodeo Drive in Hollywood. In 1976, he relocated to the small town of Chualar, located outside Salinas, California. He worked part-time at a tobacco shop in Carmel and hosted a talk show on a local public access radio station. By all accounts, he lived a typical retired life in a small town. He had successfully buried his past. On October 31st, 2022, the FBI field office in Boston announced that the Lady of the Dunes had been positively identified as Ruth Marie Terry. 2 days later, the Massachusetts State Police and Provincetown Police announced that Guy Rockwell Moldovan was wanted for questioning in the death of Ruth Marie Terry. But Guy would never be charged in Ruth's death. He wouldn't even be questioned. He had slipped the noose again. Guy Rockwell Moldovan died on March 14, 2002, over 2 decades before the Lady of the Dunes was identified as Ruth Marie Terry. This has been Crime Noir, Episode 5, The Lady of the Dunes. If you like this content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications so you don't miss out when we post another video. Stay tuned for our next episode. It's going to be a big one. The truth about Bonnie and Clyde.